Magic swords are a staple of fantasy stories. Most commons are swords aligned with good, capable of smiting evil, but there are plenty of other examples as well. There are swords capable of destroying hundreds of demons with a single swing. There are swords capable of stealing souls, including that of the wielder. We've even seen a sword that is technically also a shark. But what about a sword that is 10 swords in one? Today we will be discussing Rave, a manga that boasts one of the most extreme swords to swordsman size ratios that I've ever seen in fiction. Let's shift our focus to the Ten Commandments, the sword used by Rave Master's protagonist, Haru Glory. In its basic form, the Ten Commandments is an ordinary sword, but when empowered by the Rave, it can take 9 additional forms for a grand total of 10. Today, I'd like to answer this question. Where do these swords rank compared to each other? I'll be grading these weapons not just on power but also utility and reliability. There's just one rule. I will be treating each form as an individual, as if that sword were the only sword in Haru's arsenal, so none of the other swords will be able to cover for each other's weaknesses, nor will we be discussing any combination attacks in this video. With that out of the way, let's begin. Alright, we'll be beginning this list at number 10, Gravity Core. This is the 7th form of the 10 Commandments. And this may come off as a bit of a shock, because I'm fairly certain this sword boasts physically the strongest attack in Haru's arsenal. This sword's main strength comes from its immense weight. It's so heavy that it can even smash through rock while Haru is underwater. However, that immense weight is also the sword's greatest weakness. The weight keeps Haru from being able to use it effectively. In fact, after its first appearance, the only time you ever see Haru use it in combat is when he's using a different sword. He jumps into the air, he'll switch to gravity cord mid-air and swing it downward. If this were the only sword in Haru's arsenal, I don't even know that he'd be able to even use it. Haru's strong, but he's never been shown holding this thing up, like literally every other sword in the series. This sword is situational at best. Number 9, we have Aizen Meteor. Aizen Meteor is the default form of the 10 Commandments, for the majority of the series at least. It is also the only one of the 10 swords that doesn't have a special ability. However, it also doesn't have any weaknesses that many of the other swords have as well. With that said, there is actually one advantage that Aizen Meteor has over the other 9 swords. In this universe, magic can't be used to block ordinary metal swords, making Aizen Meteors one of Haru's go-to weapons when fighting against magic users. This sword is the definition of boring but practical. Yeah, don't tell sword experts I said that. They'll take one look at this thing and cry. At number 8, we have Sylpharion. I'm gonna be honest, this one was actually painful to place this low, but hear me out. Sylpharion is the 3rd form of the 10 Commandments, which Haru unlocks right after obtaining the Rave of Knowledge. When equipped, Sylpharion grants Haru amazing speed, both while running and while attacking. One of Haru's earliest enemies suggested that Haru's sword attacks at roughly the speed of sound. So Sylpharion should be cracked, but it's not. When using this sword, Haru can blitz most enemies in this series, and considering that his main weapon is a sword, it should be game over. Unfortunately, this sword carries one glaring weakness that drags it down from what should be the number one spot on this list. A side effect of using the sword is that Haru will actually become lighter than normal, which proportionally lowers his physical strength. Because of that, he can't actually finish off any notable enemies with that sword, which makes sense in a video game but not in an anime. The sword doesn't even look blunt, he does slash enemies with it. So there's no reason that Haru can't just rush a guy, slash him at a vital spot, and win, but he never does. I can't recall a single enemy that he finished off using Safarian. Certainly not an enemy worth remembering. What's more, the fact that Safarian makes Haru lighter gives him another weakness to exploit. He can literally be pushed back by the smallest gust of wind. During Haru's fight with Sieghart, Haru tried to blitz him with Safarian. Haru attacked with 7 sword strikes in the blink of an eye. Sieghart doesn't even move. This man literally just avoided Haru's attacks by blowing wind at him. This sword is preferable to Aizen Meteor, but only just. Again, it really hurts me to put this one so low. Number 7, we have Sacrifar, the 9th form of the sword and the darkest variation. Sacrifar, besides being the coolest looking sword, is also one of the most dangerous swords in Haru's arsenal. Sacrifar grants Haru a boost in power so massive that he's actually able to defeat the manga's final boss in chapter 164, 132 chapters before the end of the series. Of course, he stopped before landing the final blow, or else this manga would have been cut short. You see, Sacrifar's side effect is that the sword will suppress the emotions of the wielder, except aggression, turning Haru into a danger not just to his enemies, but to his friends as well. The fight against Lucia would be the last time that Haru chose to use Sacrifar in the series. If the sword were only a danger to himself, Haru probably wouldn't have an issue against using it, but he's far too protective of his friends, making the use of Sacrifar too great a risk. Still, it was satisfying seeing Haru beat on Lucia, especially after seeing Lucia pulling a Dio during his introduction. At number 6, we have Explosion! This is the second form of the 10 Commandments, and the only other form that Haru starts out with at the very beginning of the series. This sword adds 1 key ability to Haru's arsenal. When swung, it creates an explosion on impact. The sword itself seems to be otherwise blunt. Towards the beginning of the series, this was Haru's go-to weapon whenever he needed to finish off a boss. However, it does have one glaring weakness to it, though. As you may guess, Haru creating an explosion at melee range hurts. Though the backlash against him is obviously not as powerful as what his enemies experience, it is stated that this sword could kill Haru if he overuses it. Of course, this side effect is fairly inconsistent, and even when Haru is at death's door, he still seems to be able to fire these off without much of a problem. Despite being the second sword in Haru's arsenal, this one never loses its usefulness, not even towards the end of the series. Okay, this one may actually cause people to scream at me. At number 7, we have Million Suns. This is the 8th sword that Haru obtains in the series. Million Suns' blade is made of pure light, making it the perfect weapon against darkness-aligned enemies. While the weapon doesn't have too many feats during the series, it is responsible for defeating Pumpkin Dorio. For a bit of context on that, the first time Haru fought Dorio, Haru got beaten so hard that he was left on death's door. Before going to face Dorio for the second time, Haru actually chooses the next Rave Masters to succeed him, just in case he were to die in this fight. Most fights in this series tend to be 1v1s, maybe a 2v1s, in extreme circumstances, maybe a 3-on-1. Not against Dorio though. Haru brought his whole team against Dorio, and was still on the losing side until he activated Million Suns. And Million Suns actually failed the first time it was used. Haru's team would need to jump in again before Haru managed to get back up and land the finishing blow. Honestly, I almost put this sword under explosion. Again, it's a sword of light, and it actually almost failed against a darkness-aligned opponent. Literally something it was made to kill. That said, that probably says more about Dorio than it says about Million Suns. We are at number 4 in this list. The next sword is a twofer, the 5th form, Blue Crimson. When this sword was first activated, the 10 Commandments actually splits in two. However, both halves quickly transform into two almost identical swords. One sword is capable of channeling fire magic and the other ice magic. And this magic can be casted at a range. He can use each blade on the same opponent or against separate opponents if needed. In terms of weaknesses, there only seems to be one. It's been suggested that you need to be ambidextrous to unlock the sword's true power, which unfortunately Haru is not. Now, this is probably one of my most controversial picks yet, especially since I placed it above Explosion and Million Suns. But hear me out. It doesn't have the backlash weakness that Explosion has, and Million Suns was never shown to be able to use light magic at a range, which is a huge advantage in my opinion. And being able to attack in two directions if necessary is another great advantage to the sword. Just don't get the swords confused. Seriously, imagine your bro needs a pick-me-up and he can absorb fire magic. You may think, no problem, I'll just blast him with Crimson and he'll be good as new. But then your dumbass suddenly hits him with blue instead. Yeah, don't be that guy. Hey, we're at the home stretch. At number 3, we have Rune Save, the 4th form and my personal favorite. Rune Save is the sealing sword, and it cannot actually harm anything physical, like human beings. When used on a human, it will simply phase right through them. What it can do is seal things away. It has the ability to cut through magical attacks. It can cut through waves and storms many times bigger than the user. During one fight, Haru is fighting against a telepath that keeps countering him by reading Haru's mind. Haru is able to use Rune Save to seal away his own thoughts from the mind reader, just long enough to finish him off. Most impressively, RuneSafe is able to seal away a world-destroying magic without harming the girl that the magic is inside of. It also has the capacity of sealing away the different forms of its dark twin Decalogue. Unfortunately, Haru never thought about doing this during any of his fights with Lucia. Instead, Lucia would actually use his own version of RuneSave to seal away Haru's version. In my opinion, this isn't just one of the most useful swords in the series, but probably one of the most useful in all of fiction for its sheer utility alone. Still, if Haru was against an ordinary human, he would be theoretically left without a weapon to fight with, which is why this sword didn't make it to the top spot. At number 2, we have Melforce, the 6th form. Fun fact about this one, it was actually used by the dark twin of the Ten Commandments, Decalogue, before Haru even managed to unlock it. Does that qualify as a spoiler? So, Melforce has the power to create a large wind tunnel directed at a target. Its ability allows it to repel anything aimed at it, whether it be a person, an object, or even a blast of magic. Melforce is also able to immobilize enemies caught in the blast, preventing them from being able to move. In practice, Haru will start off using Melforce, immobilize his enemies before launching combos using the other swords. Of course, this list presumes that Haru doesn't have access to the other swords. Though Melforce is never used as a melee weapon, I've never seen anything to suggest Haru couldn't use the sword as a melee weapon. He simply has other swords better suited to being used as a melee instrument. Besides that, the sword could presumably be used to knock Haru's enemies into walls or off of ledges, depending on the environment. Besides all of that, the sword has never been shown to have any weaknesses associated with it. And to no one's surprise, at number 1, we have the 10th and final form, Rave. So, towards the end of the series, Haru would need an entire second version of the Ten Commandments crafted from scratch. Like the original Ten Commandments, the second version would be able to transform into the other 9 forms of the sword. The one difference, the second sword's default form was not Eisenmeteor, but was Revolt. This sword is everything Million Suns should have been, but let's talk about feats. When Haru first obtains this sword, he's in an entire city that's been frozen in an ice curse. Both the buildings and the people are frozen solid. The moment Haru touches this sword, it dispels the curse on the entire city. One of Haru's friends grabs the original 10 Commandments and swings it at Haru. Haru reflexively blocks using Revolt. The original 10 Commandment swords shatters. This weapon broke Haru's original sword, and Haru wasn't even trying to do anything. He was caught completely by surprise. Haru was able to destroy one of the 4 demon lords with a single swipe. These guys were the last sub-bosses before Haru would rush off to face the final boss in the manga. And of course, it's the primary weapon he takes with him in the final battle of the whole series. I bet you wished you had been trying that shit before, huh, Lucia? So, what do you think? Do you think I got it wrong? When I first thought up this video, I did create a list just vaguely from my memory, and it got altered a bit while I was rereading the series. It's not too different though. Feel free to add your own list in the comment section. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe to this channel for more of my random ramblings, and peace.